finally going to get to a project that a number of you have been asking for a couple months now. We are going to be hooking up the fog lights on my truck. We are not going to be building the wiring harness for the fog lights for a number of reasons. But what I have here is the fog light wiring harness from Gen5DIY.com. This wiring harness from Gen5DIY will power the fog lights whenever the driving lights are on for the truck. You can also go for a switched version of this harness where you can wire in a switch so that you can control when the fog lights are on. But for now, having the fog lights on with the headlights is fine for me. But I will put a link in the description to their harness so that you can purchase whichever version you would like. So this is the harness from Gen5DIY.com. It's for the 2014 and newer Chevy Silverados. It would work for the Sierras as well. What you have over here is your two connectors for the fog lights. You have a relay and you have your connector. One end plugs into the truck and the other end plugs into the headlight itself. And then you have a power wire that you just hook up to the battery. Simple as that. I'm very happy with initial quality. Seems to be very well built, very well thought out. So let's get it put in the truck. Now generally, as I've proven on this channel so far, I like to do everything DIY. I like to do everything myself. The reason I bought this harness pre-made, and it's just plug and play right into the factory wiring, as you'll see coming up, is simply because of the fact that I could not find the GM fog light connectors. That seems to be a real weird connector that plugs in the wires to the fog lights, and I searched for a couple months, wasn't able to find anything even remotely close. Since I couldn't find the correct connectors, there were only two options that I could find, which was either buy the factory GM wiring harness, plug it in, and hope that a ECM flash would fix it, even though everything that I found on the internet told me that it wouldn't, or it was buy this harness from Gen5DIY. So I've gone with their harness, and we'll get it installed in the truck real quick. As you can see here on the screen, these are Gen5DIY's PDF instructions for installing their wiring harness. These instructions pretty much just tell you how to power up the harness and get it connected to the truck to make the fog lights physically work, but I will show you how I'm installing it to hide the wires, make it look like a clean install. So here we go. First thing that you should always do when you're working on anything electrical on your vehicle is disconnect your battery. Here on the truck it's just a 10mm nut and the connector will come right off. So we have the positive battery terminal disconnected, and as you can see the cover is off of the power distribution block over here. I'll explain that shortly. But once you have the battery disconnected, it's time to take off your factory airbox and air cleaner. So in order to do that, you're going to want to unplug the MAF sensor first. First thing you do is just pull up on this red tab and then pull up on the rest of the connector, and your MAF sensor should come right out. Once the MAF sensor is disconnected and pulled away, I like to tuck it in between the coolant lines just so it's not in the way of anything. You want to take this clamp off of your intake tube. It's just a 9mm socket, or you can use a flathead screwdriver. Disconnect the pipe, and then we'll get to taking off the airbox. Once you have the clamp off of the intake tube, it pulls away fairly easily, and then it's time to take the lid off of the air cleaner box. It's just 4 bolts at each end. You can either use a screwdriver or the same 9mm socket that you used for the clamp. Now we have all 4 screws out of the 4 corners of the airbox. You will notice that the wiring for the MAF sensor is secured to that far corner of the air cleaner box. See if I can get the flash on here. You can either undo that connector, or you can just take the lid of the air cleaner and flip it over. To me, that's all you need to do. Just gets it out of the way enough so that you can work in this area. So pull up on the lid of the air cleaner, kind of massage it out here a little bit. A little difficult to do one-handed, but so just like that, and then your lid will sit out just like that. So we'll take out the air filter, put it out of the way, and then you have the bottom of the air cleaner box. This air cleaner box comes out extremely simply. You just need to grab it on each side and pull up on it, and it's got some pressure clips at the bottom, 2 or 3 I believe, and it'll come right out. Once you have your air cleaner removed, it's always a good time to take a refreshment break. We'll get some lemonade here. Hashtag sponsorship. The next step to install Gen5DIY's wiring harness is to get access to the wiring for the headlight. You can do that behind the headlight if you take off a kind of a plastic shroud, but in my experience it was a lot easier to take off the grille and pull the headlight out a little bit because of how close the connector is to the back of the headlight. It's just easier to pull the headlight out and connect it that way. If you haven't seen it yet, you can check out my video on how to remove the grille and therefore get to the headlight up here in the corner. I'm not going to show that twice in 2 videos, but so we'll do all that and we'll come back. Now that the grille is off the truck, it's time to take the headlight out. You just need to move it out far enough to gain access to the connectors. You have a 10mm bolt up here, one here, and then everything you took the grille off for is that bolt right there. Just got to take them off enough so that you can gain access to the headlight connector up there. Now that you have the headlight unbolted from the truck is now broken down as far as it'll go. We're at the point now we're going to start plugging stuff in and putting it back together. At this point, I'm showing you the wiring harness. I already have it disconnected from the headlight because it was impossible to show you with it still plugged in. But this connector on the left is the connector that comes from the truck, and it was going into the headlight harness, into the headlight itself. And the connector on the right is the harness from Gen5DIY. Just kind of showing you how that connector comes apart. Like I just showed you, this is the connector coming from the truck, and this is the harness for the Gen5DIY. It's the same as the headlight. So if you are unplugging it from the truck for the very first time, it's going to look like this. Just like you did with the MAF sensor, you're going to pull out on the red tab. It's got kind of 2 stages. 1, and then make sure you pull it to the second one. 2, and the connector should pull out fairly easily. If it doesn't, you can just take a screwdriver, and there's a plastic tab in there. Kind of just lift up, and the harness will come right apart. So at this point, your headlight is now disconnected from the truck, and it's time to put both ends of the Gen5DIY harness in there. The first step to putting the harness in the truck is to hook up the connectors between the truck and the headlight. You can't mess this up. Obviously, you're not going to put the 2 connectors with the red tabs together. And they only go in one way. So we're going to plug this all in, plug this harness into this connector, and we're going to plug that end into the back of the headlight, and we'll put the headlight back in the truck. Once you have the headlight plugged back into the harness, all you have left is the module, the power wire to the battery, and your 2 Foglight connectors. Hopefully it's obvious that the longer wire goes over to the driver's side. All I'm going to do with it is feed it through this grommet that the headlight plugs into, underneath the radiator bracketry, over on top of the radiator, down next to the windshield washer fluid, straight down to the fog light. So once you have the wires for your fog lights run. I have them just sitting on top of the radiator for now. We're gonna have plenty of extra wire, but once everything's hooked up and working properly, we will tidy up the wiring. All we have left to do is hook up that red wire to the battery and mount the module. As you can see, I have the wires for the harness running underneath the coolant reservoir. You can go right underneath that back corner, and I have the module right here. I'm going to bolt it to the inside of the fender right here to keep it out of the way. Sorry if the camera went a little sideways there. And then that just leaves the red wire that comes off of the relay. Simply, all I do, if the camera will focus here, is run the wire between the battery and the coolant reservoir. And you can see now why I have that cover off the power distribution block, and I have that nut loosened up where the power comes in from the battery. That's all where I'm going to plug in that harness. So with the magic of the internet, it's all hooked up. You can see the wire from Gen5 sticking out back there, and I have the module relay, whatever you want to call it, mounted to the fender right there. So we'll put the battery cable back on and we will see if the fog lights work. Here we go. I'm not sure how well that last clip came into focus. I'll include it anyway. But as you can see, the fog lights are working with the LED running lights. They look great, very easy install. So now we'll tidy up the wiring and put it back together. As you might have seen in the earlier clip, I had the wires running over the top of this bracket. I was going to tuck them down here in between the air cleaner box and the fender, but that made it too difficult to put the air cleaner box back in. So I just ran them underneath the bracket itself. You can see that little groove in the fender. The wires just tuck up there nicely, and you don't need any zip ties or any other way to secure it. It's plenty secure. So we got the 3 bolts back in the headlight, we got the grille put on, and we got the plastic cover put on. It's time to put the air box back in. This piece here that goes into the fender, it's only held on by a few clips, as you can see here. There's one on the bottom and there's one on that inside. So now we're putting the air box back in the car. You have a plastic clip there and a rubber pressure clip there and there. They line up. The plastic clip goes in that corner, the rubber pressure clip goes there and there respectively, in the same order that I just showed them to you. It takes a little bit of fiddling around to get them lined up perfectly. It's easiest to start with the one in that corner first, slide it in, and then the other 2 should fall into place. It takes a little bit of fiddling around, but you should be able to get it in. Once you get the air cleaner pushed back in, make sure you put in your air filter. You put the 4 bolts back in the 4 corners and hook up your intake hose again. And then finally you plug in the map sensor and you'll be good to go. So to wrap up this video, I hope that those of you who are expecting me to completely build the harness from the fog light connectors up to the battery connection or fuse connection and then wire and switch, I hope you guys weren't too disappointed with this. This seemed to be the best option that I could find, and in the long run, it's probably going to be the most reliable. So as always, if you have any tips, tricks, comments, or ideas of how I could have made this episode better, please leave them down in the comments below. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe. And remember that you can always DIY.